I always think of this Snoop Dogg quote where he says, "Make sure your first shit is your worst shit." It's a good litmus test of like, okay, we don't have to try to match that, and we're actively trying to do something different at the Gilroy than what we did at the first course at Old Barnwell. But also, like, there's no reason it can't be as good as it possibly can be, and it's not like we just had all our ideas and threw them all at OB1 and we don't have any ideas left. The land is very different. There's more like natural green sites at the Gilroy, and we're purposely trying to like make the greens a little bit different, kind of treating it like it's just another creative problem to solve.
Welcome to the Bag Drop, Untold Stories in Golf. I'm your host, Matt Considine, here with my co-host, the Professor, Dr. Moore. How are you?
I'm doing good. I want to start off with a kudos this morning. As a professor, my job is typically just to be critical and identify areas of improvement and ways we can be better. That's just what you're trained to do. So I want to spin that a little bit and go on the kudos side. I know we're supposed to be an evergreen pod, so I'm not going to talk about the details, but I have to give a shout out to an regulating body actually regulating and upholding the rules of golf. Kudos to the R&A back at the Open, just saying, hey, the rules of golf are what they are. We're going to enforce them. We don't care what you do, how you complain about it, who you want to call in. These are the rules. Hey, we're here to, enforce that and protect the field. So shout out to a regulating body actually doing their duty.
Governance is governing again, once again. It was good to see. Probably some other things that might need to be revisited by those governing bodies, but yeah, like a lot of stir the last month around that. Will it kick off the start of a renaissance in the rules, Professor? Are we going to enforce things once again? Are we going to revisit some? Do we have to do another pod on regulation?
I mean, to quote our friend Todd Schuster out there, it's time to put the fear of God into the players, I think is what he said. And I am for that. It's, I think I put this on Twitter. Sport is entertainment. And I think there's a level of entertainment that's there when there is a tension between the regulating bodies and the people playing the sport that just adds a layer to it. And we've just been too long, 20, 30, 40, however many years of just them being lock and step and hand holding and coddling. Hey, we need some tension there between the two.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of who's in the driver's seat a lot of the time, right? For the industry, for the decisions that are being made, and it's just feels like we've been in a position where pro golf has had a lot of say over a lot of things, and the professionals themselves, the most famous faces in the game and voices, are kind of driving. So yeah, I think it has to be a balance, right? There's got to be stewardship, there's got to be conversation, but there's got to be governance, and it's good to see that stuff. Honestly, I think for a lot of us as amateurs just playing in our weekly matches, it forced me to think about some of the things I've become a little more lax about. And I know that one, walking around your ball and the path of your swing, and you're up against a tree line and you snap a little twig on a practice swing, I've definitely been more casual around that, and with watching people in my group. So I think it was a good reminder to me of like, oh yeah, that is like a significant fundamental part of the game we need to remind ourselves of.
Yeah, I think as golfers, we got to remember we're not entitled to anything in the game of golf. You're not good shots, bad shots. There's no entitlement that comes along with it. And I think with that's, always looking to the Scottish game is something you and I like to do. And that is always refreshing when visiting over there. You see they, by and large, in their regular games, do uphold the rules very strongly, much more so at least than the American game and your typical better ball game with your buds here.
Yeah. Well, you got to be governed by principles, values, and today's guest, I think this gentleman's guided his career with some values, some direction, some principles, and really excited for who you brought on the show today, Blake Conant. I got to ask him if that's the correct pronunciation. It's on the T. I feel like most people I've heard say it's silent. I want to be on it today. I feel like it's not, but we'll find out. Blake is one of your longtime favorites. And I'm on to you, though, Professor. I know the guy builds from some kick-ass golf courses that you like, but you're such a homer. I didn't know this guy spent time in Georgia. I didn't know this guy has Nebraska roots. That is like your family out in Nebraska. You love anything Cornhusker related. Is that what's going on here? Is this a home game?
Go Big Red, go Dogs. Certainly no. I don't recall exactly where I came across Blake. I honestly think it was one of those Twitter connections. And I've got to interact with him a few times over the years. And every time it's like, whoa, there's something I learned, or something he says, or some perspective he offers up. Just I file in the Rolodex of just something to remember and pull forward later. But the first time I think it was, I was traveling up to the Northeast and put on Twitter, like, hey, where should I play? And he's like, go play Cape Arundel. All the Northeast coast. I was playing on a qualifier at Essex County Club up in Manchester by the Sea. That's the one he pointed me to. I'm like, well, if he's going to bypass all these other ones that you know of and suggest that, there must be something to it. So my dad and I went and played there, and one of the more formative experiences for me early on in getting in the golf architecture world of going and playing a place, I don't remember its total yardage, maybe 5,600 yards, but playing a place and walking off, be like, that didn't feel like 5,600 yards. There was so much cool aspects and features baked into the course, more so than most 7,500-yard golf courses I've played on, in terms of what you could learn from the grounds there. And that was my first experience with Blake. And from that moment forward, I kind of looked to consume anything he talks about, puts out there. If I get it, the few chances I've had a conversation with him, I just get excited about that.
Yeah, there's here. I mean, the just doing a little bit more research on the guy and realizing he was a painter by trade, so I'm excited for
I didn't know that.
I love the artistic part of golf course architecture, of golf itself. I love leaning into that. So I'll ask some questions from there, but we got plenty to talk about, so we'll get to it. The work at Old Barnwell, the Gilroy that he's currently on, I believe now when we're chatting with him. So it's a lot to get there. And your crack research, we're digging deep. We got some old paper he wrote, right? A thesis that you uncovered from decades ago that you knew would fire me up. So I'm excited to ask him some questions about his former self and if he still agrees with what his take was back then.
Yeah, a proud master's graduate from the lovely institution of the University of Georgia.
Yeah, it was to summarize, his thesis was the American golf course bust. A lot of courses were closing down after the recession of 2008. And, what should happen to the land if not a golf course, if it's left behind? How do you measure and decide what is of value? It was really, really thoughtful thing that I enjoyed. Speaking of thoughtful, teachings of the week, Professor, you got something for us?
I pulled some stats from his actual thesis that I thought I would just read through here to set the stage for a later conversation. He brought up the roots of his thesis go all the way back to the Build a Course a Day campaign. That was that was the NGF slogan. I think it was 1988, where they predicted there needed to be a new golf course opening every single day for the next decade. Was their prediction in their message for this, just to meet, the baby boomer demand. Golf was growing. Problem was that didn't actually come to fruition, that demand that they predicted. So, over the next, I think 20 years, U.S. added something like 5,000 golf courses, maybe more than that. But basically in the 1990s, you had the golf course facilities grew by 20%, but rounds up only went up by around 5 to 12%, depending on what you're looking at relative to private, public, and so on. So it just never matched, the build out never matched actually the demand increase, and that ultimately led to the big bust that we had. And as you mentioned, then Blake's entire thesis was, well, what do we do with that land built around golf courses being sustainable, which I want to ask him questions about that. When people say golf courses produce sustainability, what does that mean? And his thesis was diving into, well, what do we do with this land to keep up that sustainability that golf courses provide versus, housing developments and other things?
Yeah. Timely. Maybe he did predict it. I mean, or the demand didn't come, or did it, Professor? I mean, it's been, maybe it was just a little delayed. It was just a timing mechanism. That's all. We just had to hang on a little longer.
Needed a pandemic, I guess, to help out the NGF.
Who didn't plan for that? Thanks to our partners at Titleist for supporting this podcast, supporting New Club Golf Society. Professor, I love talking about my new GTS driver more than anybody. I talk about it any chance I get. However, I want to talk about the all-new Vokey SM11 wedges today. I am getting dialed. I just, the ball flight on these things are coming down. It hasn't lost its spin for me. It reacts in a way that I want to see out of my golf ball going into a green, and it's at the right trajectory, which is something I've struggled with for a long, long time. A lot of it has to do with the technology updates into the SM11, but more of it has to do with my fitting. And Dustin O'Hara, shout out to one of the best to do it. He's in Northeast Ohio now. He moved from Connecticut to here. Titleist fitters are a step above. They're some of the best in the game. And if you haven't been fit for your wedges, which a lot of people, Professor, don't get fit for their wedges, you got to make time for this. It makes a significant difference. You have so many options now with the different grinds. I'm an F guy in most of my flighted wedges I'm looking for, but I rotate between an S and a T grind on different soils now. And I love the nerdery around it, but it helps me play better golf. Help yourself play better golf. Go check them out over at Titleist.com. Start your fitting process there and play the new Titleist Vokey SM11 wedges. No other wedge is trusted by more players on tour. All right, Professor, let's get on the show. Blake Conant, welcome to the backdrop.
Thanks for having me. You got the name right too. Yeah, that's how you pronounce it.
Do you ever feel like people don't say the T? For the longest time, I thought that your name didn't have a T on it.
Yeah, you hear some Conan, as people are like, are you Conan the Barbarian? But no, it's either Conant or Conant. And then I was working on a project in Carmel Valley, and there was this foreign girl who spoke German and French, and she's like, your name's pronounced Conant. I said, okay, I trust you.
Let's go with it.
It's got its roots back in France or something. So yeah, it's like, all right, Conan, there you go.
Well, thanks for clearing that up. The Barbarian thing, I know you got the beard, that's part of your look, but that's not fair. I've heard you're an intellectual, as the professor said in our intro, and I want to start with the artistic side of your intellect, Blake. And I saw you were a painter, or you have a paint degree. What are we working with? Are we watercolors? Are we acrylics? What's your jam?
So I would use synthetic polymer, which is a fancy word for house paint, because I painted a big scale, like 4 foot by 6 foot canvases, and it was cheap and readily available when you're in college. And it's also archival, which is kind of important when you're in the art world, So there's a famous artist who I sort of got into, and he was somebody I looked up to, and his name was Al Held, and that's what he used was house paint, and he did like 20 foot by 30 foot canvases. So yeah, it was big, like geometric abstraction, and I actually sold things to people who weren't in my family. So at one time, you could have, considered me actually a proper artist, even though it was like I maybe made $2,500 total in all my sales of art. But yeah, for a short period of time, I was actually making money off art.
How about it? That's rarefied air. The paid artist. My mother is she's an artist. She's a painter, and she is so nervous about putting herself. She's been invited by a number of people now to come to art fairs and stuff. What is it about that mental block for people to get paid for their art? Like, she is terrified that nobody is going to buy her things. Any advice for her to become a paid artist?
I don't know if I have any particular advice. Like, from myself, I've heard, creative people, and the best creative people are like, just do work and put it out there. And while you're waiting for it to be judged, just do more work. It's like, just keep getting your ideas on paper, or like keep getting it out. And then, the other thing people get hung up on is how to price their work. Every artist, undersells themselves. I had a professor once who told me, artists fluctuate between massive self-ego and crippling self-doubt. And it's like, I think a lot of creative people sort of fluctuate between those two. And, that's just like, you just got to get over that hump and put yourself out there,
I think you pegged about 95% of research professors right there with what you fluctuate between.
Yeah, it's the timing of those two that leads to your success. You need to really time them up well, or else it fizzles.
Yep. Yep.
Well, from that background, what was it that led you to, you have a painting degree. I know about your first array into golf, I believe, was at Dismal River, right? With the 3 months spent with Tom Doak in your home state of Nebraska. But what's the in between? What bridges that gap? Like, I know you got a landscape architecture degree, but what was it about your art? Was it your artistic background that supported the decision to go into landscape architecture, to become a golf course builder? What was the thing that connected those two?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I always say I graduated with an art degree at the height of a recession. So there weren't many jobs or many people hiring painters, you know? So I tried to dabble in graphic design, but I actually did a study abroad when I was in art school through the University of Georgia. They have a program that goes to Cortona, Italy. And I got to spend time with, there were jewelry makers, there were painters and drawers and sculptors, and the landscape architecture program had some people over there. And I just found myself hanging out with those guys a lot. We roomed together and, you know, found out that golf architecture was a program that, or something that UGA focused on, quote unquote. And I knew it was a profession at that time. I knew, like, okay, you need to be good at math, you need to love golf, and you need to have some creative sensibilities. But I didn't know there were like programs in schools you could go to study it. Later, I found out there really still isn't. Landscape architecture overlaps the most with the things you need to know for golf architecture, but there's no certificate, there's no degree in golf architecture. And as I got out into this business and started meeting people, people come from everywhere. It's like Brian Schneider has a double major in molecular biology and biochemistry. Eric Iverson has one semester of college. You know, Brian Slonick has an architecture degree. So people come from everywhere, but landscape architecture is a route that a lot of golf architects have taken before. So then I was just, spending a year trying to get into graphic design or, trying to do something in the art world that could make a little bit of money, and just didn't want to do it. So chose to go back to school and pursue golf architecture. And, once I got to Athens, I just started emailing golf architects and calling golf architects and asking how I do it. And, rightfully, everybody was pessimistic at that time. Tom Doak and Jeff Brower were actually the only two people who were optimistic and kind of talked to me. And their message was essentially like, hey, golf's fine. There's always going to be golf. There's always room for talent in the business. It's like, it just goes through these big downswings and upswings, and you just got to ride the wave.
Blake, during that time, did you have any doubts about going into golf course architecture? Or when you made your mind up, you're like, okay, I'm going, and getting that, affirmation from Tom, you're like, all right, I made the right decision.
I probably should have had doubts. I think I was just too stupid to realize that, it's like, this is a bad decision. And, most of the people who were not positive about the golf business, maybe I should have listened to a little bit more, but it's like, they weren't wrong. But no, maybe it's, just having that little bit of like ignorance is bliss,
I was just about to say that youthful ignorance it's a strong trait that I wish I could bottle up and put some more back into me of where I was, when I was 26 years old and just didn't think about those questions. It's just like, this is what I'm doing. Well, I would say it all worked out. I want to circle back to your time at University of Georgia and, the thesis that we alluded to in our opener, but let's jump forward now because it did work out. I would argue in the last couple of years, you, as well as Brian Schneider, put out one of the most successfully designed golf courses with Old Barnwell. Now you're doing your second with Gilroy. So let's dive into those two. I want to start with Gilroy, and then we'll circle back to Old Barnwell maybe. I'm going to give a shout-out citation to Andy Johnson. I was like, hey, we got Blake coming on, great mind. What should we ask? He's like, start with this. What's the hardest thing about building a second course at the same location when your first course has been so positively received?
I always think of this Snoop Dogg quote where he says, "Make sure your first shit is your worst shit," and it's it's a good litmus test of like, okay, we don't have to try to match that, and we're actively trying to do something different at the Gilroy than what we did at the first course at Old Barnwell, but also like there's no reason it can't be as good as it possibly can be. And it's not like we just had all our ideas and threw them all at OB1 and we don't have any ideas left. The land is very different. There's more like natural green sites at the Gilroy, and we're purposely trying to like make the greens a little bit different. So, all that goes into like, it's just another, kind of treating it like it's just another creative problem to solve. We're not driving around the first course at Old Barnwell at the end of the night like, oh, that was really cool, like we should do that over here. It's just been, focused on here's what the land's presenting us, here's what would be cool to build. And, we've talked internally about like, this is kind of our ethos and our like the style that we're going for and things like that, then we'll apply to the site. So yeah, that's, it hasn't been, it's been a fun challenge. It hasn't been a difficult thing that we've had to really like grapple with of, how do you build a second one here?
Like rewinding back to when you first got the Old Barnwell job, my understanding is they always had planned multiple courses. I think with you and Brian in mind for building them. So when you all set out designing Old Barnwell, were you already thinking about what the second course was going to be, the potential land that was going to be used, and how they might complement and be different from each other? Or was it truly to get Old Barnwell done, the original course, and now let's think about the second course?
Yeah, we, our goal is always like the first one has to be as good as possible, and you can't be saving good land, or you can't be saving good ideas in your back pocket for a second one, because if the first one isn't any good, then nobody's going to come for the second one anyway. So we ended up using, we used a lot of land for the first one. It's a big property. It's 500 acres, or it might be close to 600 acres now. So we knew like, okay, even if this footprint stretches out a little bit for the first course, there will be room for a second course. And we sort of knew where the clubhouse was going to be. So the thing that we didn't consider was like, okay, do we want both courses starting from the same clubhouse? Like we weren't concerned about that. And I think that benefits OB1. If you couldn't use all that land up near the clubhouse for the first course and you were saving some of it to have a returning 1 in 18, those wouldn't have been as good a holes, and this first course wouldn't have been as good. So those were some of the things that we just didn't want to compromise for the first one being as good as possible. But we also knew like there's going to be enough land to do a second one. Is there going to be enough land to do a 7,000 yard course or a 5,500 yard course? Like that we didn't know. But it turns out there was some land we always had our eye on, and our client, Nick Schreiber, ended up purchasing that later on, which allowed us to make the second course a little bit bigger. It'll have a satellite clubhouse. It'll have a separate entrance that you come to. So you're not like driving through the first course to get there. So all those things ended up working out, and the parcel changed a little bit from the beginning. But yeah, sorry, that's a roundabout way to answer your question.
Blake, was there, so, OB1 is complete. I'm a Star Wars nerd, by the way. So if we keep referencing it as OB1, I fully understand why, but my head is going to stay in the Star Wars universe, and we're going to end up, talking about characters in Tatooine. But I'm a huge fan of Nick Schreiber's. I've gotten to know him a little bit, and just the whole project and what they're doing. And I know he really trusts the artists. He trusts the architects, like, to do what you guys do. And it's so evident in just what you just said there and what turned out, with the top 100 golf course that people just absolutely love. I think, Professor, I don't know if you've been down, but I've had the pleasure of playing it twice down. I've always seen the challenge, and so setting the stage for this second course, was there a brief from Nick or others, stakeholders, that got adjusted going into Gilroy? What was there when you're having those planning meetings, or was there still that freedom to let you guys cook?
Yeah, the latter, certainly. There were, Nick is not only with us, but he's that way with like Chase Watson, our director of agronomy, or John Lavelle, the GM, or Kitty Nicastro, the director of golf. Like, he takes his time to hire the right person and then just kind of lets them run. And he's a great leader because of that. So working on the Gilroy with him, or when we started kicking the tires on doing it, it was, you know, a lot of like, hey, what do you guys want to do? What could it be? Not imparting a lot of his own ideas. He, you know, the only two things he really talked about were let's have, you know, let's create a budget and sort of stick to that budget. And I don't really want it to be a par 69. He's like, if it can be a par 70 or more, like I would like that. Because we knew there were going to be more par threes on the Gilroy, and we have 2 or 3 holes that are like, it's either a long par 4 or a short par 5. Like, what could it be? And Nick's just like, hey, do what's best for the golf. But if it could be a short par 5, that would be great. Those are the only real 2 things that he's talked about. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's, and those that listen to this podcast regularly know that we've talked about the mission of Old Barnwell at length and just what they're trying to do for so many different facets of support and caddy programs, to the new course that was purchased. That's a community staple, not pretty nearby in Aiken County, that they're now under, you know, management of and going to be the stewards of. The Annika Foundation program supporting female golfers. Like there's so much there. And I'm going to bring this back to an architecture question, because I truly think there's like this level of empathy that great architects have, because we all have the knowledge of like the pro championship courses, and we joke. I know here in Ohio, we always joke about, oh yeah, Nicklaus built it, so you got to hit the high fade all day, right? It's just his shot flight. But there's this level of something that comes from places that are built for a broader base, and I think the mission of the club actually kind of feeds into architecture, and the fact that here's the very real example. You guys built a kids course. You know, you're not kids anymore. You were, but you have to put yourself in the mind of a child. And I think that takes a lot of empathy. And I want to hear a little bit about the design work on the kids course, but I want to hear about Gilroy, what you're currently in the dirt building. Who are you thinking about when you're out there making design decisions? Like, who is that audience? Yes, they're members of Old Barnwell, but is there something that you're trying to connect with for those people that will be playing your golf course a year from now?
Well, I just want to clarify that Brian and I are both very immature, regardless of how well we present ourselves in the public. So yeah,
that's why you grew the beard. You wanted people to treat you like an adult.
Exactly. So yeah, the kids course stuff was that was really fun, and Brian had some good insight of, you know, his 2 youngest kids were like 9 and 10 or 10 and 11 at the time or something. And he's, you know, his advice was like, hey, kids actually don't like to putt. Like, kids don't want to be on some huge tumbly green, like 3 putting. It's like they want to hit the shot. And then if they can make the putt, great. But then they're moving on. They want to rip drivers. Like, so that was really good perspective that I just didn't have. And it was like, you see a lot of these short courses, and it's an opportunity to build crazy stuff and to really like sort of put something out there that wouldn't be quote unquote acceptable on a big course. But for us, we just took that of like, okay, let's have holes of varying degrees. Like, let's let a kid rip a driver 5 or 6 times, and then, you know, let's try to have, you know, 15 different shots that are all very unique, that, you know, the green may not actually, you know, it's more about hitting the shot onto the green and then seeing if you can make a putt, rather than like making this big crazy green that is just wild. So that was kind of that was our goal with the kids course. And I think we've got some funky stuff out there that's like really fun to play for all ages. So that was really cool to work on.
Is there one feature? Give me one feature that's your favorite from the kids course before we move on to Gilroy.
Well, I mean, it's got a tunnel and a ramp. So those are 2 things that are like, you certainly don't see either of those on a golf course, on a big golf course. And they're fun. It's like, I think we've got to tweak the tunnel a little bit. We were talking about doing that this summer. Like, the angle just needs to be 5 degrees different, and maybe it's got to have a little more pitch to it. And the ramp, you know, there's a lot of people that say the ramp doesn't work as well as it could. I personally have figured it out, and I know exactly how to hit it and the pace I've got to hit it, but maybe we need to tweak it for these folks that just aren't as, aren't as skilled as I am with a putter from 80 yards, But yeah, those two features are probably the coolest and the favorite out there.
There's one on the tunnel, just a suggestion. I don't know what the budget looks like. Can we get a train? I think kids love trains. My kids love trains. Get a train that's going over the tunnel while you're hitting it. Adds just a layer of excitement to it. Just a thought for you guys.
That would be cool. Actually, Nick, I think the name of like the overarching LLC is the Station Land Company, because his kids were really into trains, and that was going to be like sort of a big theme out here. And we do have some of that. It's like the bridge on 9 and stuff, but I love that idea. That's great. It's like, keep throwing weird stuff out there,
So the second half of my long-winded question on Gilroy, because you guys are currently in the dirt, it's scheduled to open next year. Is there that ideal? Obviously, you're thinking about your work on, like you said, you got no shortage of ideas. You're going to bring new, fresh ideas to Gilroy that perhaps weren't utilized at OB1. But who are you thinking about out there? And are you thinking more about the prior course and how it's different, or are you thinking about in the design changes that are now being made out there? Is there a certain a style of play or a type of golfer that is kind of in the forefront of your mind?
I'll ask a sub question real quick. Will it not beat me up as much as OB1 is my sub question.
We're not thinking of any one particular golfer. We both think a lot of playing shots on the ground. So I do think that generally affects, how you bunker a place, leaving fronts of greens or leaving some part of the green open. It's like that may be the right side of the green and you really got to swing it around or play away. But thinking of ground game, thinking of shots that we all just like playing. And, Brian and I are the types that like, we don't really care about score, but if it's hitting a really fun shot, we'd rather do that. So trying to have this, the strategy just be something that we would enjoy playing. And, it's kind of what we did on the first course, and it seems to have resonated with others. This will be a different style of golf a little bit, but that same mindset of like, let's build golf that we would enjoy playing. And, the greens are a little bit different. They're more on the ground. So I think that's part of what beats people up at OB is, you get through that stretch of like 6, 7, those greens are just sort of up in the air. 9 is kind of up in the air. And it's like any green like that is just going to be a little more exacting than a green that's on the ground, So like I said, we had a lot of like green locations at the first course at Old Barnwell, but we didn't have a lot of like great natural green sites. And I'd say there's just a few more just like natural green sites at the Gilroy. So that'll end up, that lent itself to not doing as much work and the green sitting more on the ground. And I think people will notice that as much as anything as they go around.
Well, I think you did a great job with OB1 making the green sites look natural, even if they weren't there to find. But it's interesting, I haven't thought about, because I know when we had an earlier conversation about Old Barn OB1, Blake, you did talk a little bit about, hey, how do we challenge the good player, right? Like, what are the things we need to do to design this course in a way that the good player is going to find it a challenge? Are you thinking about that same thing with Gilroy? Or it's kind of a sub question to Matt's question, or is this Gilroy not being thought about so much about the top level player in that way?
No, it is certainly. And I think the greens will, at first blush, you're going to think that they're easier, but they're a little bit smaller and they've got a little more pitch to it, generally speaking. That wasn't a goal. It was just something that's kind of happened organically. And I think what people will find is like, okay, they're as equally challenging, just in a different way. And you're gonna want to play it a few times to figure out, okay, I can't be over here because it's pitched so hard at this angle that I just don't want to come in from the left side. So I think that's sort of the difference. But like the test for good players will be still kind of around the greens and working your strategy back from there.
I hope I'm remembering this correctly, but there was additional land bought for Gilroy, correct? And was that on? Tell me about that story, if there was one. Did you guys say, "Hey, we need this"? There's a sweet slope over here that we want to get our hands on, Nick. Or if that wasn't your course, I apologize. But I thought it was for Gilroy that there was more land acquired.
No, we did. There was always this little sliver of land that connected to Andrews Circle Road, and we had talked to the owner of that land originally, and he was never attached to it. It was basically he and Nick had a conversation of like, hey, if you ever are interested in it, like, just chat, we can figure something out. So we started kicking when like Gilroy became serious and they started talking about like operations and logistics, and Nick asked us to like, is there any way you could get people from the clubhouse and back? And it was like, well, you could try to buy this sliver that's just adjacent to OB, or, you could get this, what we called the purple parcel, which is a long, like, it's 90 acres. And it's, we've got the 1st and 17th parallel each other on the long side, and then 18 runs the short side. And it's, it was just one of those things that it's like, okay, this will make it work. Like we need a satellite clubhouse. We can't have a returning 1 and 18 to the big clubhouse right now. So this will link everything together. And from there, it was just, Nick biting the bullet and buying the land and getting it attached to our bigger parcel that we have, and then doing the routing from there.
It's stunning how many golf course stories entail something like that. You're from Nebraska. It reminds me, I think both Bally Neal and Sandhills both had situations where it's like, oh, if we could buy this parcel, this will give us this affordance. It's cool how that comes together. Just a great example of how golf course design evolves as a project comes along.
Yeah, we're just, architects are greedy, I think. It's like, there's a cool green site over here, and it's like, if you could just get that land, like, it'll make your golf course better. So yeah, it's just us being greedy at the end of the day,
Well, and at the same time, then for the owner, right, it makes a better golf course, and of course, that's their goal, is to have the best golf course possible. So once you plant that seed in their mind, you have to know as a designer, they're going to find that parcel, because they do not want to wake up 5 years from now thinking, well, if I just had bought that parcel, this would have been a better golf course. At least I would not want to go to sleep at night thinking that every night for the rest of my life.
Yeah, totally. And land is getting more expensive around here, and it's like, once you have a golf club, your neighbors know the value of their land is higher if they're adjacent. So you don't, the whole impetus for building in the Southeast is it's cheap land. But once you've got a golf club and you've dumped millions of dollars into it, it's like your neighbors are like, oh, well, this isn't valuable to anybody else but this one guy who actually now wants it, and he's calling me up. So they kind of, you're better off buying as much adjacent land as you can before you've told anybody that you're building a golf club to insulate yourself. It's like, once the cat's out of the bag, you don't have much leverage,
That's right. That always reminds me of my early career in tech, a domain that I worked for, a large, fast growing a tech company, and their domain in Australia was scooped up by a bartender, a sole proprietor in literal outback of Australia. And he sat on this website page until the price was right. And I always commend that guy. I was like, man, that's awesome. He hopped on GoDaddy one day, he scooped it up when he goes, they're going to be coming here. I bet you they're going to be in Australia soon. I'm going to sit on it. I probably made a nice payday, but the professor, you want to take Blake in a time machine here and take us back to a thesis of his?
I think it's perfect timing. Blake, you brought up land and development and increasing the cost of land and the price of land and the value of the land. Of course, then that depends on, does the golf course stay around? And, we're winding back over a decade now. You did your master's thesis at the University of Georgia. I'm going to start with the abstract and title real quick, and then that will kick us off. I know Matt's going to have tons of questions he wants to go down, but the title was Bankrupt Golf Courses and Historical Analysis and Strategies for Repurposing by Blake Conant. More than 800 golf courses have closed since 2003, and approximately 1,000 to 2,500 are projected to close in the next decade. Many of these courses are repurposed as high-end mixed-use development, high-density residential, or big box development. The sustainable benefits of the golf course once provided either diminish or leave completely. As our country's 21st century needs shift towards food, water, and energy security, bankrupt golf courses can offer repurposing opportunities to plan for those needs. The goal of golf course repurposing should be to provide similar or greater sustainable benefits as the golf course once did. Understanding how that land can be sustainably repurposed is vital for local communities, environments, and economies to thrive in the 21st century. This thesis will offer suggestions, strategies, and solutions for repurposing bankrupt golf courses that have yet to be implemented in the United States. Everybody should go read this thesis, I think. We might be dusting off the cobwebs for you, Blake. I know it's been a while. Before we get into the nitty-gritty and details and your suggestions and how you're going to solve these problems, I want to ask, how did you end up on this topic for a thesis? I feel like this is a pretty obscure topic. Even for many people going to golf course architecture, they'd be thinking, how can I build my thesis around building golf courses or that process versus, no, these golf courses are closing up. What do we do with that land afterwards?
Yeah, I was just very captivated by a lot of the traditional landscape architecture and ecological things I was learning in school. And, we spent a lot of time at Georgia talking about, sustainability and, just what the world is going to look like in the future and how we can better design spaces to accommodate that future. And so, I just didn't have anything like profound that I wanted to get into as far as like golf course principles or design or anything like that. I was like, well, let me merge these two together because this is something we're seeing in the golf course design industry. And I didn't know if that would eventually be like, okay, Blake's going to be the person to like, maybe that would be a road I would have gone down. I was like, I'm the guy to figure out what to do with your defunct golf course. But yeah, it was just kind of merging these two things that I was interested in and, seeing where it led me.
Blake, a professor knew this would hit a chord with me because I've gone into some deep thought and research and just talking to people that are, I started my golf business prior to the most recent golf boom, the largest golf boom, which came with the pandemic and the 2020 and beyond. But prior to that, I was coming into communication with public courses that were struggling, private clubs that needed members desperately. They needed younger base. They didn't know what to do with their course on a low budget. And so I don't know, something about this really hit a chord with me. I think the main thing I loved was just the argument of, well, what are we measuring is kind of what I took away from your thesis here is. And I think you broke the early part of it down into environmental, social, and economic benefits. And I think we're just so over-indexed on the economic benefits. Obviously, you need to be, especially if you're a for-profit golf course, because you can't be the other things if that equation isn't there. But the environmental and social part, I just feel like are so they're like tossing after the points are being made of what to do with a course or a facility. Thankfully, the economics have gotten better for a lot of places the last 5 years. If they haven't, you really should wonder what's happening with their operation because of what's happened in golf. But I'm curious about environmental and social and how you think, 14 years later, how are we doing on measuring those, you think? Do you feel like there's a better, across the industry and all your different projects and people you come in contact with, are we doing a little bit better job of measuring what the impact a golf facility, a golf course does to the environment, what impact it does to the social and community on top of economic?
Yeah, those are the three legs of sustainability is the social, economic, and environmental impacts. They're not equal. Economic, if it doesn't work economically or financially, like the other two don't matter. You're just not going to get that to work in a capitalist society, right? But I think the biggest thing that COVID figured out for everybody was the social impact does have value. And whether we can quantify it or not, like people could see it and it was tangible because you were losing the social impact in every other part of your life. And so I think that's what that's what really drove the popularity of golf. And that's what really that's why golf courses started seeing, 25% rounds increase or 30% rounds increase is a social aspect. And that's what, people who play golf a lot and who have played golf for a long time inherently realize that. But I think it ebbs and flows and you lose sight of that sometimes. There's we always want a formula for how much value does this have and how do we quantify it? And, sometimes it's just well, you can't, but you just have to recognize that it does have value. The environmental aspect is different. Those are things that you can quantify. You can measure water usage. You can measure chemical usage. You can try to be better about all those things. And the thing that I was really attached to from a 30,000-foot view, I don't remember what I put in that paper, but it was particularly urban and suburban golf courses and these little 9-holers, the green space that they provide, it's you're you're in an urban area. It's and then suddenly there's this place with trees and it's the temperature is 7 degrees cooler than the surrounding areas. It's there's green space, there's areas for people to walk. There's this game that people can get exercise. So the things like the water use or the maintenance it takes to maintain that golf course is offset by these benefits it provides to a community. Where I think I would have liked to go a little further with that thesis, and I don't know if I did, or I don't know if the timing worked out for when I wrote it, but what you're actually seeing is the golf courses we kind of want to close weren't the ones that closed. Pre-recession, it was a lot of these golf courses were getting built simply as a driver or an incentive to get people to buy a home. So then you had a housing development golf course that then suddenly they weren't putting the money into it. It was kind of falling into disrepair. And it would be great if those golf courses could close and become then you could think outside the box of how to actually make that usable green space for those homeowners so their homes didn't just sink in value. But what I think we're actually seeing is it's the mom and pop 9-holer that we're losing. It's the the muni that the city can no longer afford, and people didn't learn the lesson from Winter Park. And it's well, we're just going to close that, or shutter that. So that's data that I'm just I don't have data on what types of golf courses have closed since I wrote that thesis and what we're seeing. I think I was pretty spot on with the 1,000 to 2,500 golf courses that needed to close. I think we've actually seen that. I would just be curious what the breakdown is.
I don't have the breakdown, but that was one thing I was going to comment on is your actual prediction was pretty much in line with what the numbers were on the supply side. You couldn't have anticipated the demand of what 2020 would bring, but hey, it was 7 years prior. You're not the oracle, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, if I could predict pandemics, I might give up my golf architecture game. But
yeah, there's probably other industries that would suit you well there. No, the successful repurposing of those courses, because you're right, and I don't have the data in front of me, and this would be a fun thing to kind of dig into, but I can name so many. I could name, historic ones, even Golden Age closures, 9-hole mom and pop type places on both hands, but I can't name more than one repurposing of residentially built golf course in the boom of 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. The Yard in Florida comes to mind, where they turned kind of 18-hole regulation residential golf course into more of a loop for the community with a great food and beverage operation and live music. And that's really the only ones coming to mind. Have you seen other examples of those, early 10s courses that were struggling that did repurpose their facility to something imaginative or something that was more sustainable?
Yeah, there is a case. I think there's a case study in my thesis of one in Houston or Dallas that was doing something cool or trying to do something cool. Hey, we've got this, the golf course, double barrel housing, but you've got the 70-yard wide corridor that sort of snakes through all these homes of how could you get that to be a some type of trail or pathway or loop or whatever, similar to what you're talking about. And I think I've heard of a couple more since then, but that's such a tricky part of these home values are so attached to golf being there that I don't know, and they all, I assume, have a homeowners association. So is it actually in the best interest of the homeowners association to band together and buy the golf course so that they can then maintain it? And you kind of, you almost, I think developers were doing that or assuming that that's what would happen. And it's like, cool, now we have this asset that isn't ever going to make money. And we've been able to pawn it off on the homeowners and now it's their problem. But it's just one of those things like, yeah, man, I guess we'd rather do that than see our home price drop 40%. Because I don't know, it's like I had all these grand ideas of you could do wetlands, you could do solar panels, you could do wind farm, you could do all these cool things that would have a huge environmental benefit. And I probably lean too hard into the environmental having more value than it should have. But those are all really cool sort of out there ideas that you could implement. But it's just, how do you get people to go for it? How do you make it financially viable to do? So like any thesis, there were probably a little too moments where I was just idealistic and, ignorant, but that's why you have these kids. And it's you can get a good idea, and then somebody who actually knows the way the world works, it's they can figure out how to execute it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but it takes someone with a little time to dig into the question, right? And spark it for somebody else or someone else can run with it. The one thing as I was reading it this morning, I was thinking to myself, man, this is so true of those places that I, connected with that were struggling, had to ask those hard questions of, what do we do? What's the reuse of this? And how do we sustain? But I kind of caught myself. I'm like, wait, are we using this for new projects as well? Does it have to be post a failure, post, a recession for us to ask the hard questions? And I think about where you're currently at, Old Barnwell, from the hop, and I just know this from being friends with Nick Schreiber and some of the mutual friends that we have, hearing that story, the social questions of what is going to be the social impact, the environmental questions of what's the environmental impact, certainly the economic questions were always kind of at the forefront. And I'm just curious, they seem like the anomaly. There doesn't seem to be the same level of attention to those, pillars of sustainability, let's call them, or you might have said, in every project that goes out there. And I'm just wondering if whose job is it to make sure that all three are represented in golf, no matter public, private, municipal, or mom and pop? It just feels that those three have to be asked every day.
Yeah. I think the best places that we know of sort of do it naturally. The best public places, maybe, at least the social part. And, Nick was always very upfront of hey, I want you guys to build a great golf course. I hired you because I think you're talented and I know you're going to do as well as you possibly can. But ultimately, he's I'm into this for the programming and the social and what the club can do. Nick always talks about golf being a Trojan horse for actually doing good in your community and having the sum be greater than the parts, basically, of hey, you've got 300 people who they're successful, they're diverse, they're well-educated, and they people are looking for a way to give back. How can the club be a vehicle to help them do that? And if they band together, can their collective efforts be greater than just a single effort, So Nick's always approached it from that point of view, which I think is just really refreshing. And he got a lot of ideas from, clubs in the area, or he did his due diligence of talking with people and seeing what works well. They're not the first club to have a foundation attached to their golf club. It's Congaree quietly does really good stuff. There's tons of clubs that, quietly go about these things. And Nick talked to all of them and was like picking their brain of like, okay, what works? How would you do it differently? Like if you were us, what would you do? And I think that really benefited him a lot as well. Of like just, hey, we want to make this place like this is our goal. Yeah, we love having a good golf course, but like this is our ultimate goal. So how do we like lean into that and just keep making it better?
It's so cool to hear that. Just in the process for doing that, because all those of us that just eat all this stuff up, we want to see courses like the Gilroy and places like Old Barnwell exist, and aspire to go play Congaree and places like Broome Sedge, and there's just so many great projects. We're in this kind of second golden age, as a lot of people have called it. But I have seen this generation of leaders and founders of these places, and I wasn't around, back when people were building the others, but it does feel very collaborative, and they're just sharing across ideals. Do you find the same collaboration from your architectural peers? Like, now that your name is one of the popular names that'll be on scorecards, do you feel like you have that? Do you have resources to go to that you can, call, or is there still a healthy level of competition, as any capitalist thing is, right? And golf is still a business. Is there a balance? How do you feel amongst your peers, Blake, in that regard?
Yeah, I think golf's a small world. Everybody kind of knows everybody, or at least knows of everybody, and there's people that I've worked with over the years of just like, hey, I'm working with Kai Golby, and we're both working for Todd Ickenroad out in California, or like I worked with, Brian for 12 years, worked under him as, on multiple projects. And so there's just like, there's people that I just have a relationship with. And, Aiken's kind of funny because there's just so much being done, at the same time. So like we had a barbecue a couple months ago, and we know Brian Zager from working at the Lido and working with Doak. And so Zager came over, and Eric Iverson was helping him at 21 Club. And Kai came over, and Brian's doing New Holland. So we had guys from all three projects that are happening in Aiken. And it's just like, well, yeah, we're all friends from these, different paths. And it's like, we just wanted to get together and have a beer and cook some meat, So that's like, it sort of happens organically that way. There's other people who I stay in touch with, or I'm just like, hey, I saw this thing, like, that's really cool. I think there's a healthy level of, we're all competing for the same jobs, but like, you're not resenting anybody, and you're really just looking for folks who are doing cool work. And if somebody does something cool that I see, it's like, I'll text them or I'll send them a note on Instagram, like, that was awesome. Like, good job. Like, congratulations. Like, So I think the golf world is, there's this very healthy, like, community that surrounds it. And, it's a healthy level of competition as well.
Like, I'm glad you brought up all the work going on in Aiken, because it's sort of surreal, the number of courses that are popping up there, and high level, great architecture golf courses. With your personality, do you like to go check out those projects and see what they're doing as you're working on Gilroy? Or are you someone that wants to ignore what the other person's doing because you don't want to fall in the trap of like, oh man, that's really good, and now maybe feeling reluctant about what you're doing? What's your personality on that?
No, I like to see stuff. I'm not as good as like Brian Schneider gets out and sees everything. And I'm less good about that because I'm traveling back and forth between here and Nebraska. So it's like when I'm in Aiken, there's an amount of work I need to get done while I'm down here. And then I'm like, it's hard to tell my wife with a 4 and 2-year-old at home and she's playing zone defense, like, hey, I'm going to stick around for 2 more days and just check out these golf courses and drink beer with the fellas. I can get away with that sometimes, but it's like, it's not all the time. But I went and saw 21 Club when they had last year, when they had 12 of the greens done, well, 6 of the greens done. I went over and saw New Holland as Brian was getting going. When Kai was working on the tree farm, we went over there a couple times. I'm always like, it's not going to affect me at all to see what somebody else is doing. It's more about like, I don't want to step on your toes, or I don't want to take up your time. Everybody's busy, So I'm always happy to say like, hey, I'm here. You don't need to guide me around. Just like show me where the first tee is and I'm happy to walk. Like, I don't need somebody touring me around for 3 hours and taking that time out of their day when I know they're busy and wanting to work as well. So yeah, it's more about like, it's more about empathizing with them and finding the right time for them, for me to come check it out. But I love seeing new stuff, and I love seeing what people are doing. Yeah.
Blake, in the spirit of being busy, as I know you guys are now, I'm going to squeeze in one more question and we're going to let you go. But I'm going to take us maybe in a more sentimental direction to wrap. In that thesis, the professor uncovered, you do use one of the case studies in it was a course that did close that I think was near and dear to your childhood. You grew up playing in a Long Shadow, which was maybe Highland Country Club prior to that, an old Jewish club in Omaha that didn't survive, right? Didn't make it. You can't go back and resurrect it, or maybe you can. I don't know what it was repurposed for. You could fill us in, but what's a thinking about those rounds and what it meant to you as a kid? It sounded like it had a tremendous amount of social value to you. What's a project that you'd like to work on that would kind of pay tribute to that? Give the next Blake out there years from now the same type of golf education, golf social construct that you had. What would it be? Where and what?
Yeah, that's, doing something in a city would be great. It's just so hard nowadays. Something like the park that Gil did down in West Palm, I think would be very fulfilling. I would love to do that without needing a bunch of people to donate their money. It's like, can we figure out a way to construct it and like let this be an actual business,
Mm-hmm.
But that's the tricky part. It's like private golf clubs, why you're seeing a lot of them is construction is so high, but they can charge more for their rounds. But it's like, if, the rule of thumb is for every $1 million you spend, that's $10 towards your green fee. So if I want a $60 green fee, I can only spend $6 million. So it's like, well, irrigation systems cost $4 million right now. Like, and you can do them bare bones for cheaper than that, but it's just like labor and petroleum-based products are they've gone crazy since like summer of 2021, and that's what's going to be really hard in the future. Is like, how do we build public golf courses that aren't reliant on wealthy donors to basically support them? So that's something I would love to do. I do think like where this ties back into my thesis, and maybe, I don't know if I wrote about it or not, but it's like Mike Young, who's a fellow Athenian, or was an Athenian. I think he's in LaGrange now. But, he's like, hey,
he went back to LaGrange.
It's the third owner who makes money because you can buy the golf course for 10 cents on the dollar. And then you can actually you don't have the upfront cost to carry somebody, the bank carried that or whoever. So now you can actually just run this golf course and try to make some money. So where I see an opportunity is a golf course that's struggling, but it's on a good piece of land with good soils. It's like, hey, that's actually close to people. If you put some money into it you could make the routing better, you can make the greens better. You don't have to sink the money into it that would be the cost of an entirely new development from scratch, but you'd sink money into it to make it a good golf course. It's already well located, and then you can have a golf course that isn't $300 to play. It's reasonable for locals. I'd love to see the industry turn more towards that than just seeing these little like 120 acre parcels kind of go to a developer and then, turn into a mixed use development with some homes and businesses. And it's like, I think you could take another crack at it that way before you have to turn to the vertical construction.
I'd like to see your talents unleashed on that, Blake. So keep it up, man. Looking forward to seeing what you guys end up with at Gilroy, and congrats on everything, man. Really appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks very much for having me.
And thank you guys for listening. The show has been the joy of the professor and I, not just connecting with each other every week and some really fascinating people in golf, but also now our listeners. You guys have been reaching out, and we thank you for doing that. You can always email us at thebagdrop@newclub.golf. If you're not subscribed to the show, please do. It goes a long ways in just helping us out and making sure that we know people are listening and checking in with us. You can rate, review the show wherever you're listening. And if you want to connect with the professor and me, we'll also have our links along with Blake's in our show notes if you want to reach out to him. This show is put on by New Club Golf Society, and we want to thank them as well as our partnership with Titleist. And they're all new SM11 wedges. Check them out in the link in our show notes as well, or over at Titleist.com. We'll catch you guys on the next one.